What if you spent your entire life hiding who you really are? James Carter, a renowned lawyer and devoted family man, seemed to have it all, until the day a muscular, mysterious window cleaner appeared outside his office. One glance was enough to ignite a forbidden desire he'd buried for years. But what started as a passionate secret spiraled into tragedy, leaving James trapped between guilt, regret, and a marriage he never truly wanted. What happened between them? And how did it change James's life forever? You won't believe the ending to this intense and heartbreaking story. The sun was setting over the city, painting the skyscrapers in shades of orange and gold. James Carter leaned against the glass wall of his office on the 40th floor, gazing at the breathtaking view. It was a rare moment of peace in his otherwise chaotic life. His desk was cluttered with contracts, court briefs, and reminders of his relentless career. Behind the facade of success, though, James felt hollow. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, his wife. A simple, "Don't forget dinner at 8." James sighed. The routine of his life felt suffocating, but he told himself it was what he had chosen. Or rather, what had been chosen for him. He loved his children, but his marriage had become little more than a performance. As he turned back to his work, something outside the window caught his eye. A man in a safety harness was cleaning the glass, his movements slow and deliberate. He was shirtless, sweat glistening on his muscular torso under the fading sunlight. James froze, his breath catching in his throat. The man looked up, locking eyes with James through the glass. A playful smirk spread across his face as he raised his hand and drew a heart on the fogged surface of the window. James felt a rush of heat he hadn't experienced in years. Who was this man? And why was James so captivated by him? Ames couldn't pull his eyes away from the man. He was no stranger to beautiful people. His work often put him in rooms with the wealthy and attractive. But this was different. The man's body glistened in the sunlight, his biceps flexing as he wiped the glass with ease. He seemed completely unbothered by the dizzying height or the world bustling far below. Miguel, as James would later learn his name, glanced back at him, his dark eyes filled with mischief. The heart he had drawn on the glass wasn't just playful, it felt intimate. Miguel leaned closer, his lips moving as if to say something, but the barrier of glass turned his words into a silent tease. James flushed and turned away, pretending to shuffle papers on his desk. But even as he tried to focus on his work, his mind wandered. It wasn't just Miguel's physique, it was his confidence, the way he seemed so at ease. James thought about the contrast between them. Miguel, free and unapologetic, and himself, trapped in a life he hadn't chosen. He hated how easily this stranger was unraveling him with a simple gesture. As the minutes ticked by, James tried to shake the feeling. He stood up and walked to the coffee machine, determined to refocus his mind. When he returned, Miguel was still there, now cleaning the adjacent panel. James hesitated, then stepped closer to the glass, his pulse racing. Miguel saw him and grinned wide, leaning forward to press his hand against the glass. His palm left an imprint, the heat from his skin fogging the area around it. James felt a dangerous mix of emotions: curiosity, arousal, and fear. He wanted to speak, to open the window and ask Miguel his name, his story. But what would he say? What would a man like Miguel think of someone like him, a lawyer in a tailored suit with everything on paper but nothing real? Miguel waved and mouthed, "Bye," before moving on to the next window. James watched as he disappeared around the corner of the building, leaving behind only the faint outline of a heart. He sat back in his chair, his thoughts racing. He felt exposed, as if Miguel had seen a part of him no one else ever had. The next day, James couldn't concentrate. His morning meetings dragged on, his mind preoccupied with the memory of Miguel. By lunchtime, he found himself lingering by the windows, scanning the city below in the hope of catching another glimpse of him. As if on cue, Miguel appeared again, his harness lowering him down to James's floor. Today, he wore a sleeveless shirt that clung to his torso, damp from sweat. James felt his heart race. Miguel looked up and smiled, giving James a small wave. Summoning courage he didn't know he had, James opened the window slightly, just enough to let his voice carry. "Hey," he called out, his voice steadier than he expected. Miguel glanced over, surprised. "Hey yourself," he replied, his accent smooth and warm. "Nice view you've got here." James laughed nervously. "I could say the same. You're quite dedicated to your work." Miguel smirked. "And you're quite good at watching." His boldness caught James off guard, and he felt his cheeks flush. Before he could respond, Miguel leaned closer, his expression softening. "Name's Miguel," he said, offering a hand through the small opening in the window. "James," he replied, shaking it. Miguel's grip was firm, his touch lingering a moment longer than necessary. Their conversation was brief, interrupted by a phone call from Rebecca, reminding James of dinner plans. But as Miguel moved on to the next window, James knew something had shifted. For the first time in years, he felt alive. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. James and Miguel began meeting in secret, their encounters growing bolder. Miguel would tap on the glass to signal his arrival, and James would find excuses to linger in his office long after his colleagues had left. One evening, as the office floor emptied, Miguel slipped inside through the open window. James felt a mix of panic and excitement as he locked the door behind them. Miguel stood there, his shirt tossed aside, his muscles illuminated by the glow of the city lights. "You've been watching me," Miguel said, stepping closer. His voice was low, teasing. James couldn't deny it. "I couldn't help myself," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're mesmerizing." Miguel smirked, closing the distance between them. "You've got a lot of secrets, don't you?" Before James could answer, Miguel kissed him. It was intense, passionate, and everything James had been craving. His defenses crumbled as he surrendered to the moment, letting Miguel guide him to the desk. They moved with urgency, their bodies tangling in the heat of desire. Hours later, as they lay together on the office floor, James felt a rare sense of peace. For the first time in years, he was himself, not the lawyer, the husband, or the father, but James. Just James. James and Miguel's encounters turned into an obsession. Each night, after his family had gone to bed, James would find himself lingering at the office under the pretense of work. The reality was far from professional. Miguel would tap on the window, shirtless and confident, and James would let him in without hesitation. Their passion was raw and uninhibited, filling the emptiness James had carried for years. But living a double life wasn't easy. At home, Rebecca began to notice his absences. "You've been working late a lot," she said one evening over dinner, her tone more inquisitive than accusatory. James forced a smile, hiding the truth behind the same practiced lies he'd told himself for years. "Big case coming up," he said, his voice steady. But inside, he felt a pang of guilt. The guilt, however, wasn't enough to stop him. Miguel brought something into James's life that had been missing. a sense of freedom and excitement. Their conversations weren't just about lust. Miguel talked about his dreams, his struggles, and the life he envisioned beyond the city skyline. James found himself captivated by Miguel's optimism, a stark contrast to his own calculated, risk-averse nature. One night, after hours of passion, James lay beside Miguel on the office couch. The city lights filtered through the... James's secret world with Miguel began to bleed into his everyday life, and the cracks were starting to show. Rebecca's questions became more frequent, her eyes narrowing every time he mumbled an excuse about working late or canceled family plans. His colleagues noticed, too, whispering about his distracted demeanor and his frequent absences from team meetings. One evening, as James stared out the window of his office, waiting for Miguel's familiar tap, he found himself wondering how long he could keep up the charade. The thought filled him with a mixture of dread and exhilaration. Every moment with Miguel felt like a stolen treasure, but each lie he told to preserve their secret felt heavier than the last. When Miguel finally arrived, his grin was as mischievous as ever. "Miss me?" he teased, stepping into the office with his usual confidence. Tonight, he wore a tight white tank top that clung to his chest, accentuating every muscle. James couldn't help but smile, the tension of the day melting away as he pulled Miguel into a kiss. But this time, Miguel pulled back. His expression was serious. "James, we need to talk." James froze. Those words, so simple yet so ominous, sent a shiver down his spine. "What's wrong?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to hear the answer. Miguel hesitated, his hands resting on James's shoulders. "I can't keep being your secret," he said finally. "I care about you, but I'm not going to spend my life sneaking around. You have to make a choice." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. A choice? How could he possibly choose between the life he'd built and the one he craved? "Miguel, it's not that simple," he began, but Miguel shook his head. "It is that simple," Miguel interrupted. "You either want to be with me, or you don't. But I won't keep being your escape while you pretend to be the perfect husband at home." The silence that followed was deafening. James wanted to protest, to explain that he needed time, but the truth was, he didn't know how to untangle himself from the web of his own making. Miguel sighed, stepping back. "Think about what you want, James, but don't take too long. I'm not going to wait forever." With that, he turned and left, leaving James alone in the office, staring out at the city lights. For the first time, James felt the weight of his double life crushing him. And for the first time, he realized he might lose the one thing that made him feel alive. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between James and Miguel grew. Miguel still appeared outside James's window, but the playful smiles and teasing gestures were gone, replaced by a cold professionalism that cut deeper than any words. James tried to focus on his work, on his family, but every time he closed his eyes, all he could see was Miguel walking away from him. At home, things weren't any better. Rebecca was growing increasingly suspicious. "You're distracted," she said one evening as they sat in the living room. The kids were upstairs, and the silence between them was heavy. "You're not here, James. Even when you're home, it's like you're somewhere else." James opened his mouth to respond, but what could he say? That she was right? That his heart was somewhere else entirely? Instead, he muttered something about work stress and excused himself to his office, leaving Rebecca alone with her doubts. That night, James stared at the heart Miguel had once drawn on the glass. the faint outline still visible despite the weeks that had passed. He traced it with his finger, his chest tightening with regret. The next day, he decided to confront Miguel. After hours, when the office floor was empty, he opened the window and called out to him. Miguel hesitated before stepping inside, his expression guarded. "I can't lose you," James said, his voice trembling. "You're the only thing in my life that feels real." Miguel crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "Then do something about it, James. Stop hiding. Stop pretending." "I don't know how," James admitted, his voice breaking. "I've spent my whole life being what everyone else wanted me to be. I don't know how to be anything else." Miguel softened, stepping closer. "Start by being honest. With yourself. With her. It's not easy, but it's the only way." James nodded, though fear still gripped him. Could he really risk everything for this man? For this love? James's days turned into a haze of guilt, passion, and the weight of decisions he wasn't ready to make. The office was his sanctuary now, a place where he could hide from Rebecca's probing questions, the cold silence of his home, and the inevitable confrontation looming over him. Every stolen moment with Miguel felt like a lifeline, yet it also deepened the chasm of guilt inside him. Miguel, however, was reaching his limit. "You think I don't notice?" he said one night, his voice tight with frustration as they lay tangled on the office couch. "You come here, lose yourself in me, then go back to her like none of this exists. I'm not some escape, James. I'm not a fantasy you can tuck away when it gets inconvenient." James sat up, his heart pounding. "That's not what you are to me. You're everything." The words sounded hollow, even to him. Miguel raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Then prove it," Miguel said, his tone softening but still firm. "Be honest with her. Be honest with yourself. I can't keep doing this if you're not willing to fight for us." The ultimatum hung in the air, unspoken yet palpable. James had always known this day would come, but he wasn't prepared. The walls of his life were closing in, and for the first time, he felt like there was no escape. The following evening, James walked into his home with a sense of foreboding. Rebecca was waiting for him in the kitchen, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She had grown increasingly suspicious, and James could see the questions brewing behind her eyes. "Late again," she said, her tone neutral but laced with accusation. "I had a lot of work," James replied, his voice steady. Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed her phone on the counter, her thumb hovering over the screen. "You've been distant, James. Distracted. I know you're not telling me something." James felt his stomach churn. He could see the cracks in their marriage widening, and he knew he was the one who had caused them. "Rebecca, he began, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could finish, her phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen, one that made James's blood run cold. It was from Miguel. Rebecca glanced at the phone, her eyes narrowing. "Who's Miguel?" she asked, her voice sharp. James froze, his mind racing for an explanation. But there was no hiding now. The truth was staring him in the face, and Rebecca wasn't going to let him evade it any longer. "Rebecca," he said, his voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." Rebecca sat across from James at the dining table, her arms folded and her expression unreadable. The kids were upstairs, their laughter and footsteps a distant echo as James prepared to shatter the life they had built together. "Say it," Rebecca demanded, her voice low but firm. "Whatever it is you've been hiding, say it now." James took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he placed them on the table. "I've been lying to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To you, to myself, to everyone. There's someone else." The room fell silent. Rebecca's face paled, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Who?" she asked, her voice cold. James hesitated, then forced himself to look her in the eyes. "His name is Miguel. He works near my office. It started out as nothing, but..." He trailed off, unable to find the words to explain what Miguel had come to mean to him. Rebecca's eyes widened, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over her. "Miguel?" she repeated, as if saying his name would make it less real. "You're telling me you've been with a man?" James nodded, his shame evident. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did, and I can't keep living this lie." Rebecca stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" She spat, her voice rising. "To me? To our family?" "I know," James said, his voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. But I couldn't keep pretending." Rebecca laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face. "Pretending? Is that what our life was to you? A performance?" James shook his head. "Number. I loved you, Rebecca. I still do, in my own way. But this is who I am, and I can't change that." Rebecca's tears turned to sobs, and she buried her face in her hands. James reached out to comfort her, but she pulled away, her voice trembling. "Get out, James. I don't want to see you right now." James stood, his heart heavy as he walked toward the door. He paused, looking back at Rebecca one last time. "I'm sorry," he said again, but the words felt hollow. As he left the house, the weight of his confession settled over him. He had finally told the truth, but at what cost? James sat in his office, staring blankly at the skyline. Miguel was his anchor in the chaos, the one person who made him feel alive after confessing the truth to Rebecca. But even with Miguel, the weight of what he had lost hung heavily over him. When Miguel arrived that night, his smile was a comfort James desperately needed. "You told her?" Miguel asked gently, taking James's hand. "I did," James said. "She's hurt, furious, and I can't blame her. But I've ruined everything." "You didn't ruin anything," Miguel said, cupping James's face. "You took a step toward being free. That takes courage." Miguel's reassurance gave James a flicker of hope, but it was fleeting. As Miguel moved toward the window to leave, his foot slipped on the ledge. "Miguel!" James shouted, reaching out, but Miguel lost his grip. The harness failed, and in an instant, Miguel was gone. James froze, staring out at the void. His screams echoed into the night, but no one could bring Miguel back. The sirens that came hours later did nothing to break the crushing silence in his heart. In the days that followed, James became a ghost of himself. Rebecca called to tell him she was filing for divorce, her voice cold. His colleagues whispered, his reputation crumbled, and the life he once knew dissolved. At night, he sat in the dark office, tracing the faint heart Miguel had drawn on the window. The memory of Miguel's laughter and touch haunted him, a reminder of what he had lost. "You said I wouldn't lose you," James whispered to the empty room, tears streaming down his face. But Miguel was gone, and James was left with nothing but regret and memories of the man who showed him what it meant to truly live. This story is a poignant exploration of love, desire, and the cost of living an inauthentic life. James's journey reminds us of the weight of societal expectations and the courage it takes to face our truths. His love for Miguel was pure and transformative, but it came at a tragic cost, leaving him to grapple with regret and the question of whether freedom is worth the price of loss. This tale serves as a powerful reminder to cherish the moments and people who truly make us feel alive and to live boldly, no matter how daunting the consequences might seem. Hey, did you enjoy today's story? Tell us in the comments below. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this intense and emotional tale? Do you have a story you'd love to see featured here? Share it with us in the comments. Your idea could become our next gripping video. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time with another unforgettable story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with friends who love a good drama. See you soon.